So, what do you want to talk about?
Well,
Everything.
So just to start off, could you maybe go through like how you maybe got into playing music, what early bands you were listening to when you were growing up, that kind of stuff?
Um, well, I got sort of interested in music quite early on, and was about 13 or 14. So it would have been 1962, something like that. And there was very little on the big stations, radio. I don't think it was any. I think it was Radio BBC. I don't think it was. There wasn't even a one or two then. So we used to listen to music on these transistor radios, which was beamed in from Radio Luxembourg in Luxembourg, which played a lot of American music. So my brother and I were listening on these funny old headphones and through this crackling radio set, and first heard people like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly. And we both got very excited because there wasn't much music in my family, as it turned out. My parents had been through the war, so that was quite enough for them. And I just got really interested in what was going on in America, and it was coming over to here gradually, because obviously the Beatles burst onto the scene and everybody got terribly excited. And it really, we're used to the term teenager, but in fact, actually the word teenager was sort of born in the early 60s, which seems a bit weird. So suddenly, us teenagers were sort of trying to, I don't know, get to play music. And I bought myself a cheap guitar, and my brother did the same. And we sort of made a terrible noise together for a long time. and then so that progressed, and I really was in bands since I was 15, I think. So it's been quite a long time. Obviously, when the Straits thing took off, that was something quite different. Not that we knew it at the time, but as it turned out. So I think a lot of people start off like that. If you spoke to David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, it'd probably be a similar kind of approach to it. Just started playing simply on a battered up old guitar and copying really what was around at the time.
Yeah. How did you find transitioning from those small bands into such an explosive big band like Dire Straits?
Well, the Straits thing didn't really, it didn't happen straight away. I mean, we were playing in some quite small, insignificant places, although they were quite significant on the circuit, but it only held about 100 people, maybe 150 people. And sometimes you might have 10 people in there at the very beginning. I mean, it sounds weird to say that now, but when you start off, you've got to work up an audience. It doesn't come at you straight away. And the difference for us was that when we made a demo tape, we took it to this DJ called Charlie Gillett, and he was playing new bands, which was very rare on the radio in the early 70s. Was playing new bands on a Sunday morning, and everybody listened to his radio show because he used to play new music. And we gave the tape to Charlie, and amazingly, he played it. So then the record companies got very interested in us, and things started to sort of happen quite quickly, actually. So it was a lot of catching up to do. We had to grow up very quickly and deal with all the attention that was coming at us.
Yeah, well, that's something that I kind of wanted to ask about as well. Being in such a massive band with such a big legacy like Dire Straits, especially at a young age like that, how did that impact and change your life, that experience?
Well, of course, it threw it into complete chaos. I mean, everything else took second place. But I think it was a good job that none of us really had girlfriends at the time. I think if the girlfriends had seen what was happening, they would have probably been extremely angry, but we were away a lot, and so I mean, being in a rock and roll band is quite a selfish act, because you are literally hanging out with your mates all the time. There's no sort of time for sort of going out to a restaurant with your girlfriend or anybody else. You literally are in each other's lives constantly, so you get to know each other very well. and thankfully we got on, and you know, it got on very well. Otherwise, well, it wouldn't have worked. We would have gone our separate ways. But and Mark and I think formed a quite strong friendship pretty much straight away, which is still there, I'm pleased to say.
I wanted to ask, obviously, because we want to talk about your solo stuff recently as well, obviously, as well as the new stuff. But am I right in saying that you worked with Mark still, you know, still made music with him even after Dire Straits had ended?
We did a couple of things, but nothing of any significance. More just for fun, I think. I can't remember. We did a sort of charity thing for 3 different charities, I think, in 2000 and 2000 and I can't remember now. 2000 and what? God, I just can't remember. Which, you know, was literally just to raise money for some charities. And we said that if we ever got back together again, it would be for that reason. But you know, he's following a very different path than he doesn't really want the Straits thing to be back on its feet again, really. And really, in a sense, it's quite nice just to leave it as a legacy as for that time, because I think that I feel that what we left behind was probably enough, really. And it's quite interesting. I mean, I've been talking to a few people over the last couple of days because I've been promoting. I mean, that's why I'm talking to you, because I'm trying to promote my new record and talk about the tour and all that sort of thing. But anyway, we'll get onto that in a minute. But I think that one thing I've picked up from all the people that I've spoken to is that somehow or other, the Straits have left you know, quite a strong musical legacy, which I've been surprised, because I've been talking to people actually about your age and who really like the new album and have gone back to listen to all the Dire Straits stuff. So I think that the secret, really, I mean, I always say this when a band says, well, "What's the secret to success?" And I said, "Well, I have no idea, but I think if you've got to write good songs, because that's the way you communicate with the rest of the world." And if you write songs that have some meaning to them or some relevance to people's lives, then people can connect with that. And I did give it a couple of examples. I think, you know, something like Brothers in Arms, for instance, is very relevant to where we are now in the world. And, you know, as I say, you know, you being experts of ancient history, you'll realize that, you know, we keep making the same mistakes all the time, and we don't seem to learn very much. So I think, you know, a song like Brothers in Arms is extremely relevant, just generally because of its nature, and so not many people can write things like that. So in Mark, we had a fantastic songwriter, and I learned a lot from him with my own work. And so, you know, I pursue, and when people say to me, "Oh my God, your albums sound like Dire Straits songs," and I go, "Well, I don't understand why they wouldn't. Of course, they'd sound like, you know, I was in the engine room making all that stuff, you know, holding together. So obviously they're going to sound a bit like that." But also, I picked up a lot of tips, I think, from Mark. And also I listened to a lot of other singer-songwriters. So you learn on the way, really. It's a bit like anything in life. The more you do it, funnily enough, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
Like playing golf or something, you know, the more you practice, it's really funny. You actually get better at playing the game.
Yeah.
You know.
While we're kind of still on Straits, before we transition to talking about like your newer projects, just being in a band that was so influential in a time where there were so many other artists who were sort of changing the face of music, who was like, you must have just met so many people who were so influential to you, so many people who are influential to music as a whole. Who was some other musicians that kind of stood out to you as really, you know, when you met them, it impacted you?
Well, I mean, I've passed a few people on the way. I mean, the first person that springs to mind, of course, is Bob Dylan, because, you know, he's he's the voice of not just one generation, but several generations. I don't think you ever have. There won't be another one like him. I don't think. I don't think there'll be another Neil Young or a Joni Mitchell. I've not met either of them, but Bob was, when we met him in LA in '79, and occasionally after that a couple of times. He's an extraordinary fellow. I mean, he really is a very unusual man. I think he's fundamentally quite shy, actually. But I shouldn't really put anything into anybody's heads about him, because I just like him for what he's written. Playing with Eric Clapton was always a great pleasure. I mean, just extraordinary music, and Elton John and all those people. Phil Collins, when he was playing the drums, was an extraordinary drummer. So it's been a real pleasure to bump into people now and again. And the Live Aid thing, of course, we bumped into quite a lot of people on that particular show. And thankfully, most people's egos were put to one side for the day, which is always, was quite tricky when you've got a lot of powerful people playing on the same stage. So it's been an interesting life, and there's the one thing I found, generally speaking, about most musicians, though, is that when you sit down and talk to them, they're remarkably sort of I'm not going to use the word ordinary, but they're only remarkable for what they do. They're quite, they're just like everybody else, really, but they've been put on pedestals. So it's a bit, when people say, "Oh, you're a legend," I hate that title. I mean, I just happen to be part of a successful band, and had a fantastic time doing it. But people like to put sort of I don't know, signs on people. But I don't wear them. But I mean, I did really enjoy the success of it, though. I enjoyed the fact that when you met somebody, they kind of knew who you were, and I knew who they were. So it's been an interesting life.
You obviously, as well, you recently wrote a book. How did you find sort of reflecting back on all these past times? Because I mean, to summarize, a huge part of your life in one book must be quite a feat. How do you find the writing process and the reflection process?
Well, I had to leave quite a bit out, because there wasn't really enough time to put it all in there. And I tried to steer a fairly careful path, because I decided it was going to be a celebration, not kind of a finger pointing thing about who did this and who did that and who did this wrong, and who the hell does this guy think he is, that kind of thing. It was more of a celebration of the music, the band, what it's like being in a situation like that for all those years, and playing all those gigs and keeping it together. I mean, I think that Mark and I made a very good team in keeping this solid, the solidness of the band together, which is probably the reason why we stuck it out together. But you need to have various key people in when things get very big. And so the interesting thing I found about when I was writing the book, there was an awful lot of people there that I needed to mention who were part of the team that made it work. I mean, if you can imagine taking 140 crew on the road and organizing all the things that go along with that, just feeding them 3 times a day, for instance, in the middle of nowhere, and that's quite a feat in itself. I mean, it's like having an army on maneuvers. I shouldn't mention armies at the moment. At least we didn't run out of fuel. So, to me, the book was really, for me, actually kind of necessary. I reached a particular point in my life where it was good to reflect back on, so I could make a bit more sense of it. Because when you're involved in it, you're so busy doing stuff, you don't really think about it. I mean, we very rarely stopped, to be honest. And I think I needed to go back and sort of put it in some kind of framework, because then I could really address where I am now. And Mark, I said to Mark I was going to write the book, and he was fine with that. because it's important that, you know, he was all right with me writing. And I said, it's okay, I'm going to say some very nice things about you. So, and he very kindly wrote the foreword, which is great. Have you read any of it yet?
Not
No,
yet.
actually.
Hoping to though.
Well, you might find it interesting because it's a sort of historical document, really. Oh, that sounds terribly pompous, but I didn't mean it to sound like that. It sort of shines a light, really, on how things function on those kind of levels, from the very humble beginnings to, you know, the sort of rather absurd places where you get to at the end.
Yeah.
And how you deal with it, really. I mean, you know, it's an incredible psychological effect on you. And I had to really adjust my life a lot when I came off the road. I mean, I didn't know how to book a bloody airplane ticket or get a taxi, or you know, I had to think about how to make food again. I mean, because when everything's done for you, you don't really think about it. I remember thinking when John Lennon said, you know, when the Beatles broke up, he said, I didn't know anything about anything in the world because there was always somebody doing it for me.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of that, and psychologically, it's an incredibly stressful thing when you're away so much and away from your family and your friends, and you know, you're having a fantastic time and enjoying yourself to the bits, but there's bits that you forget that are part of your life. So when you get back, you have to almost rebuild yourself, which is what I did. So that's when I went into painting big time, and which I still do now. I still paint a bit now.
Yeah, it sounds like a really interesting book. I'm really looking forward to reading it. Sort of in a similar, you were sort of touching on it a bit there, those things of having to change and transition sort of when you were getting home. In a sort of similar way, how was it when you started transitioning to making your solo music? Was that difficult for you?
Well, I left it alone I left music alone for quite a long time. I did a few things with some mates, but not much. I really just painted because I wanted to do something completely different to try and get my head back together. And it wasn't until, oh gosh, when did I do the first one, Streets of Heaven? I can't remember even when that came out. I got quite ill in 1999. I was diagnosed with leukemia, so I had to deal with that, which was a bit of a pain in the ass, and which knocked me for six for a while. But I managed to get through that, and I'd written an album before that. I think it was 2009 that one. So it was quite a long time. I mean, it was probably 15 years before I decided to write a record, and then I wrote the next record while I was in hospital recovering from leukemia, which was quite bizarre. And then I was off on a roll. Then really, I thought, okay, well, I think I can do this, and so now we're on number 8.
And this new album, then, how has the process of this album been in particular? And could you give us some insight into maybe what it touches on or what it means to you?
Well, it was different this time because I started it during lockdown, whereas normally I would have everybody in the room, all the boys that I usually play with and girls that I play with, and we sit down and we just play the song together until it sort of comes into shape, which is exactly what we used to do with the Straits. But this time, of course, because of COVID, I had my son Harry here, who was 23 at the time, and he brought all his digital recording stuff down with him. So I said, well, let's make use of it. I've got some tunes and I want you to, let's start putting them together, you know, which was great. So I worked with him pretty much every morning for about 2 or 3 hours. That was his attention span. I'd record in a room with the guys and the girl singer who sings with me. And then we play around and knock it into shape a bit better, you know, but this time I had to do pretty much all of it myself. And then get everybody in separately to play the bits that I thought they should play. So it was quite a different process, but actually it worked out okay. But it took longer.
Okay.
It took much longer. And I think I've got down what I wanted. I mean, there's songs on there which reflect you know, what was going on at the time. There's a song called None of This Was Planned, which obviously is about the pandemic, and the next line is, or so they say. In other words, you know, there's a bit of suspicion still around about how the thing actually arrived on our shores, or around the world. But anyway, and you know, this the main track that's out at the moment, Long Way Back, is really a reflection on you know, the Straits going to LA for the first time and playing at the Roxy and meeting Bob Dylan and you know, and that kind of thing. So I mean, it's looking back, and it's the present day. So I've been trying to encompass really everything that's going on in my life, which I usually try and do. There's a love song on there to my wife, Love You Still, which I amazingly wrote in an afternoon, which even surprised me. Normally they take a lot longer than that. But no, I'm very pleased with it, and it's had really rather lovely reviews, which I'm even more pleased about, because if you do something creative and somebody else likes it, it's a real bonus.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
you can like it yourself, but you've got to, everybody else has got to get into it somehow.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of talking about that process of how things are so different now. How does the process of writing and releasing music now compare to how it was back in the 70s? Are there major differences in that process?
Well, not really for me. I still do. I'd still do it what I would call in a fairly old-fashioned manner. Although when you record now, you record on computers, not on tape. You can, but it's very expensive on tape. So that's I still do things in the traditional fashion. But I've watched my son doing it, and it's completely baffles me what he does, because he produces sounds from somewhere which I've never heard before. So I think there's a lot of different ways, if you like, of getting to the result you want. But as I said before, it's pretty important to have a song in mind, because otherwise it's all very well making music all fit together, and dance music and stuff, and DJ work. Well, my son is actually a DJ as well, but you know, that's a different kind of thing. I mean, I'm rather keen on singer-songwriters, because I think that they've got a lot more to say and involve people in. So I think that's, you know, that for me, that's the main thing. But it you know, the books seems to have done pretty well as well, which surprises. I'm always surprised by things. I don't know why. I'm always surprised when people say we're like that, which is nice. I mean, you know, the first time I sold a piece of art, I was completely amazed, and I almost gave it to the bloke, because I thought, no, you can have this, but he insisted on paying for it. And it's the most extraordinary feeling when somebody actually pays you for doing something which you can't help yourself doing. If you know what I mean. Well, I always look forward to touring. I tour very modestly these days, and which is great. And so a very small crew and small band, and I go away for a couple of weeks, just so I'm not going to get divorced again. And you know, we have a really lovely time, and we play every day. We don't take a day off, because there's no point. If you're only playing for 2 weeks, you don't need to take a day off. That's what I tell them anyway.